Good morning, folks. Welcome to our presentation on implementing a BI solution with Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. I think no one doubts the importance of business intelligence, especially with Microsoft Dynamics AX, and you've seen a lot of demos where we've showcased BI. One of the questions I think you probably need to, you're probably thinking about is how easy or how difficult is it to implement a BI solution? And that's what we're going to discuss today. And my name is Milinda Vitharana. I'm a senior program manager. I work with our R&D team based out of Redmond. And I'm also joined by my colleague.
Hi, my name is TJ Vassar. I'm in charge of reporting. I'm also with the Dynamics AX BI team. I work with Melinda. I'm a senior program manager. So, good morning.
So here's what we're going to do today. We have about 90 minutes. We're going to go through some of the details of implementing the solution. But in order to level set first, let's try to familiarize ourselves with some of the pains and challenges that you face in implementing a BI solution. And of course, we will discuss how we have tried to help you with those pains. So first, let's see how easy it is to implement the pre-built solution that comes with Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. Now, of course, if you attended our overview session yesterday, we kind of gave you a brief preview of how comprehensive the solution is. We'll try to go into it in a little bit more detail. We'll also try to see some of the content that gets shipped. And also, a BI solution will evolve as time goes on because you'll have unique requirements that you need to incorporate. We will also see how you can customize and extend and what are the different architectural approaches that you can follow to customize and extend. And of course, we'll actually do a real example of some customization. We'll actually show you how to extend the pre-built solution using Microsoft BI Server, SQL Server BI tools. So, yeah, let's go. So, first of all, let's try to focus on some of the pains and challenges. Now, Sarah, who's a CFO, she's a representative user, and typically, users want information all the time, especially executives like Sarah. They ask for information all the time. Now, the other thing also is that they're not willing to wait that long. I mean, gone were the days where you would expect a user to give his requirements or her requirements, and then a couple of days later, you can actually go with the report. But now they want to have information quickly. The other thing also is that, it's great that there's lots of tools out there, but learning tools is not what they do every day. So they want to be able to use familiar tools when consuming this information. Now, Simon, think of Simon as a systems implementer. Maybe he's your partner, or maybe, Simon could be one of your users or one of your admins in the IT department. Now, as a systems implementer, he obviously wants the implementations to be quick and short. But, obviously they are not as short as he likes them to be. But then he would like to meet the needs of the users. He would like to be able to customize so that he comes up with a good solution that users will find easy to use day in and day out. But the problem with BI solutions is they're complex. There's lots of tools to choose, there's different aspects, and then, of course, BI means different things to different users. So there's complexity that he has to deal with. At last but not the least, you would get someone like Nandita, who's a developer. Now, as a developer, you need to improve your productivity. So that means you need to be able to work with tools and languages and technologies that you're familiar with. And of course, the name of the game is reuse. You don't want to have to rewrite everything on the BI side of the fence. You want to reuse as much as possible from the core implementation, the core ERP. And of course, again, the use of familiar tools and technologies, you don't have to relearn a new technology just inherent when implementing a BI solution. So I think the question is, how has Microsoft solved some of these pains, mitigated some of these pains with Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012? First of all, of course, the idea is that we ship a comprehensive solution. When you install Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, you get a comprehensive solution that has detailed data. So for an example, the production data, you can access production data with some of the pre-built tools. There's about 700 pre-built production reports. There's about 150 sort of decision support reports, if you will. A whole lot of stuff from ground up. Now, so TJ, one of the most important things we've done in this release is related to production reporting, right?
Yeah, so we've shipped out of the box over 850 production reports with AX 2012. Now, those of you familiar with AX 2009 will say, hey, this number is slightly smaller than the number of reports we shipped with 2009, where we had over 1,200 MorphX reports. Now, this is for good reason. We actually took this opportunity to revisit all of our reporting solutions, and we found that we were able to consolidate a lot of those solutions into, instead of 5 reports, a single report. With SSRS, you just have the ability to reuse code across reporting solutions. What this also does is this opens up the door for a larger talent pool. You're no longer bound to that one developer in your IT department that's familiar with X++ development. SSRS is an industry solution for reporting, and now you can tap into that talent pool to assist you in building your own reporting solutions. So the number's smaller overall, but the effect is much greater. And you should see that we cover all of the modules in AX with these reports, and we give you the tools that you'll need to either extend the out-of-box reports or build custom solutions of your own. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. I have a session this afternoon at 5 p.m. And again at 4 tomorrow where we'll get into the actual development details and how to actually create and extend your own reporting solutions.
Excellent. So let's jump into demos.
Sweet.
Now, what we're going to show you today is the typical life cycle of a BI implementation with Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. So it all starts with the systems implementer. When you implement the system, he would have to install and configure the BI solution as well. Let's see how that happens. And of course, after the system is implemented, users like Sarah, our CFO, can start actually using the BI solution that comes out of the box. We will see what capabilities Sarah has, so that some of the self-service tools, how she can customize the experience she sees. And of course, over a period of time, when she starts using it, the next thing you're going to hear from her is, hey, I want a new report. There's a new requirement that I need you to work on. So let's think of a new problem that Sarah wants us to solve. And let's pretend then that we are actually Simon and Nandita, and we will try to solve that problem for her. We'll try to create an extension to the out-of-the-box solution that ships. Of course, Simon will migrate it to production. We're not going to probably see it today, but then the idea is that the migration to production happens just like any other AX application. So we're going to have 4 demos, and let's jump into it. So the first demo is installing and configuring the pre-built BI solution that ships with Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. Now remember, Simon as a systems implementer, he wants implementations to be pain-free, it needs to be quick, he doesn't want to deal with a lot of complexity. So what we're going to show you is how actually Simon would go on implementing the BI components in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. So now when you implement a solution, there's, I guess, a couple of steps that you need to do. First, you would set up AX on your servers. So you would have multiple servers in a production environment. So you would have SQL Server Analysis Services server, you'll have SQL Server Reporting Services. Now, what you would do is you would actually run the AX setup wizard on these boxes. Now, what we do is when you run AX setup wizard, when you select options to configure BI components, we actually first check all the prerequisites for you. So if those prerequisites are not there in those boxes, we actually help you to download and configure them. Now, once you actually set up those prerequisites, then we go ahead and configure the server. So I'm not going to actually show you, I'm not going to actually run the AX setup wizard live here, but I'll show you some of the screenshots and explain what happens there. And then once you are done with the setup, then you would launch the AX client and you would initialize, and of course you would attend to things like data upgrade and stuff like that. But then after you've done that, you would run the analysis project wizard and deploy the components into the SSAS server. So think of the installation and configuration experience as two steps. First, you would run the setup wizard. You would go to the box, set up, SSAS server, all the prereqs are taken care of for you. And then once you've configured the servers, you would launch the AX client and you just deploy the components, right? It's just that simple. So when you run the AX setup wizard, it's a small screen. But basically what I want you to realize is that you can actually configure more than one analysis server for AX analysis extensions. So when you run the wizard on that, we would detect the analysis services instance, and we would actually configure. And next thing what we will do is we will actually ask you the where the AX production database is, and we would also actually capture the users who will be processing cubes and stuff like that. I mean, think of it this way. Fundamentally, once you're done with the configuration, AX will understand all the servers that are all the SSAS servers, and then we would have primed all the servers so that they're ready for deployment. Now, if you remember, if you installed analysis components in AX 2009, you'd remember that you'd have to set up things like Kerberos authentication. This configuration actually takes care of it, so you don't have to have Kerberos authentication anymore. I was hoping for standing ovation, but that's fine. Thank you. So once you've done this step, you would actually go into AX client, and then you would run the analysis project wizard, and you would deploy the cubes into the server. So let's just run that. I'm working with dual monitors here, so bear with me. So typically when you launch the AX client, after the initialization wizard, initialization checklist, a systems administrator would typically see a menu structure like this. So the idea here is that the systems administrator or the implementer would come here, and he would launch the analysis project wizard to deploy cubes. The wizard would look something like this. Now, there are 4 options that you can choose from. In this case, we are just going to deploy the project. And now one of the things you'll notice is the deployment the wizard actually asks you to select a project, right? And the thing you'll notice is that it's asking you to select the project from the AOT. So in other words, in this release, we're actually shipping the analysis services project in the AOT. It's a first-class citizen of the AOT. So in other words, for an example, there is the sys layer analysis project in the AOT that ships out of the box. But your partner can actually add value, and your partner can ship a project. Your ISV can ship a project. In fact, the public sector SKU of the product, if you buy, public sector actually has a cube project in their own layer. And also, you can actually ship other solutions that you have developed in the AOT, and you can deploy the project. You can deploy any one of those projects. Of course, this is layer aware, so I'm in the user layer. It'll select the project in the layer that is immediately below me or above me, however you look at it that way. So once I select the project to deploy, it's a fairly, what we do is we actually, it's still spinning, but what we actually do is we ask you the server to deploy this cube project to. So in this case, of course, in most cases you would only have one analysis server in a production environment, so you can actually choose that server to deploy. Still thinking. Now the other thing that you'll notice when this comes up is that you can actually change the database name if you want to. For an example, here we go. So it identifies the server that it needs to deploy to. It knows the server name because when you ran the setup wizard registered that server in AX. So, this is your default analysis server. And of course, you can either create a new database and you can give a name. If you don't want to choose the default name for any instance, you can give a different name. And of course, you can process the cubes after you deploy. Now, I've already actually deployed and processed the cubes, so I'm not going to select deploy. But one of the things that you should realize is that when you deploy and when you process the cubes, there's a step where we actually do some prerequisite checks. Now, the reason why we do that is just so that you don't fail in cube processing later on. So, for an example, we check whether you have, entered, like for an example, account category definitions. I'm just bringing it up. What account category definitions do is, they make sure that your KPI definitions are tightly bound to your accounting structure and so on and so forth. So we do a lot of those checks to make sure that you will get a good role center experience. Now, if you haven't defined those yet, typically when you initially deploy the solution, you probably haven't defined those master data. That's okay. You can ignore and go ahead. But the idea is that when we deploy, we make sure that we do everything possible so that cubes would process without a problem. Okay? So, so let's just stop the wizard here. I want to show you another thing, which is now, when you install the system, as you probably know, initially, you may not have all the licenses that you need. You may not have turned on all the configuration keys that are needed. You may turn them off later on. Now, what happens is every time you turn them on or off, if you're familiar with AX 2009, you had to go and fix up cubes using a white paper. In Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, that's all done with the wizard using a configuration option. So whenever you run that, whenever you make a change in AX configuration, you would launch the wizard, and instead of the deploy option, you would choose the configure option, right? And you would choose the project in the AOT. Of course, the wizard will make sure that your project is in a healthy state before it goes and does any changes. So it's confirmed that the project is in a healthy state, and then you can basically go ahead and say, apply the AX configuration to my cube solution. Now, what does it do? Think for an example. Now, out of the box, when you implement the solution, we have cubes and we have reports, we have role centers that pull data from the entire application. Now, what happens is you may not have bought some components. You may have turned off some components. So it might be that, certain cubes are probably not relevant for you. And certain role centers may not be relevant for you, or they may not have any content because you turned off all the reports and cubes and they're no longer relevant anyway. So what this does is it actually takes care, it actually removes all those cubes and measures and KPIs and things like that that are no longer relevant for you. So once you run with this wizard, it'll actually fix up the cube project, and of course you can add additional languages if you want to using the same option. So again, I'm not going to run it in the interest of time, but then after you've done this, it'll fix up the project, save it back into the AOT in your layer, and then you can run it as many times as you want as you configure. So that's a real quick summary of So that's a real quick summary of what the wizard does. And basically, the idea is that you have the pre-built solution that comes with the product. You would use the wizard. You would deploy as is in the initial state. And then as you make changes to the configuration, you would run the wizard again, apply that configuration into the BI solution. And of course, we'll talk about it later, how we customize and add new cubes. So that's a real quick demo of how we configured. Now, after you have configured the solution, users can start using the role centers. And let's real quickly see Sarah using her role center and then using the pre-built solution. So if you remember some of the pains that we talked about, the idea is Sarah wants information, she wants it quick, she wants to use tools that she's familiar with, and let's look at her role center, and let's look at some of the production reports. So this is the CFO role center. Now, you've seen probably a better looking CFO role center and in the keynote as well as the BI overview presentation. This is the CFO role center that ships with Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. And as you probably know, in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 R2, which is coming very soon, there's going to be a major content improvement in the role centers. So as a CFO, there are certain KPIs that she's interested in. There are some analytical reports. There are links to her reports as well here. Now, one of the things that Sarah wants to do is, of course, she wants to add additional content into her role center. Now, it could be that Sarah does this on her own, or it could be that someone in her department does it for her. And the interesting thing here is that the role center is really built on SharePoint. So, if you see this, she can personalize this page if she wants, and she simply hits this, and then you'll see this familiar SharePoint UI, right? And what you can do now is you can actually add web parts, and let's go and add a web part, right? Now, of course, there's a selection of web parts that she can choose. Now, these are standard SharePoint web parts. There's also a set of web parts that Microsoft Dynamics provides, because these web parts know Dynamics AX data. They know Dynamics languages. They know the Dynamics company context. So we built some web parts which are, AX friendly, if you will. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick this business overview web part, and I'm going to add it. Now, basically what this, let me say stop editing. Now what this business overview web part does is it actually enables you to add things like KPIs and indicators from the pre-built cubes. So imagine that your IT department has provided Sarah with some cubes, and those cubes are rich. They have KPIs, they have various indicators in them. And what Sarah can do is actually she can add the measures and KPIs that she wants. So in this case, let's say she picks the general ledger cube, and inside the general ledger cube, there's quite quite a bit of measures in here, and let's just say general ledger cost of goods sold in accounting, gross profit. And of course, she can select either current, or she can compare, this year versus last year, and then, can say okay, and then, it adds these measures. So the idea here is, this is standard SharePoint. Microsoft Dynamics AX has provided some web parts that are aware of AX context. So for an example, there's the currency, there's the company that she's looking at, and that company is sensitive to the AX company context. But in addition to that, she can also add other web parts like SharePoint and Excel services and so on and so forth. So with that, I'll hand you over to TJ, who will walk you through the reporting experience.
So should I come back over here? Sorry. Just give me back over there.
Oh, that's the next one.
Okay. So just really quickly, I want to just show the user experience and using reports from role centers. And we've made some huge advancements with SSRS framework in AX 2012, Dynamics AX 2012. We introduced the framework in 2009, but we also maintained our support for the proprietary reporting engine that's built on MorphX, simply because it wasn't a fully integrated solution at that point. That's no longer the case. Dynamics AX 2012 reporting is built on the SSRS framework. It is our platform for reporting. It's fully integrated into the product, and you can see from this experience here, we've actually we're able to take in controls that are driven by AX code. It's no longer generic web parts that are driving the user experience. You also have access to the sysquery form so that an end user can further filter down the data set that they're viewing in a report beyond what the developer has defined. I guess I have to bring this over here. So this is a familiar asset that people really value in AX because it allows end users to decide on their own what data they'd like to see in a report. So we brought that experience into reporting. We've also got the ability to set up batch jobs directly from the report run UI. And finally, we've also got the ability to deal with print management settings. So beyond rendering a report to screen, you can send it to a file. You can attach it to email as a PDF, all from within the product. There is no more outside job or necessary to set this up. Now, by default, this is accessible through the UI, but you can extend your solution so that these settings are defined by code, so that the user has no involvement in how the reports are output. Or you can sniff the context that establishes the parameters from the user session itself. So we've got a blog out there there's a ton of code examples in the product, and that shows you examples of how to use code to drive some of these experiences. So beyond that, not only is the parameter dialog have the look and feel of being within AX, but also the reporting experience itself. So this is a traditional tabular report that existed in the MorphX solution. However, we've revisited with SSRS and just kind of gave it an upgrade. The look and feel, the topography of the solution, it's just a cleaner, more well laid out design. You also have the ability to interact with the parameters directly in the window so that you can change the filters that define the report data set without having to close the report and try to look for the location where you actually enter the report. So it's a really interactive experience. And like I said, I'll show you more examples of SSRS reports, but this is just to give you an idea. Some of the basic reports you'll see with the product.
Thanks, TJ. So we've seen the power of the pre-built solution. You've seen some role centers. You learned that it's based off of SharePoint, so that you have the ability to customize them by using a rich set of content available already provided in SharePoint. You've also seen the richness in the production reporting environment, how we've kind of tied it together. And also, what I haven't shown you today is some of the BI capabilities inside the AX client, which is something that we'll be showing in the overview session. So now Sarah has started using the reporting solution, but now she has a new requirement. And what she wants to do is she actually wants to focus on collections. Looks like they need to focus on collections, and looks like they've been offering some bad payment terms to their buyers, to their suppliers, and then now they want to actually, Sarah wants to actually, perhaps even renegotiate some of the payment terms with the involvement of Julie, who's the head of marketing. But of course, Sarah also wants to, she has her collections team. Connie is the collections manager. She, of course, generally manages by exception and so on. And of course, there's Arnie and April. They're the real folks who pick up the phone and call and pick up collections and things like that. So, and then there's Julia, who's, I think that's the other Julia. We have two Julia. The other Julia, who is actually a sales rep, and they all want to. Sarah wants them to work together. So as you can see, this is a typical BI solution. It's not just about a report or a specific thing. It's an initiative that this company is working on, and let's see how let's see the solution that we can provide for her. Now, when you have a real situation like this, one of the things I think that you need to decide on is, what are the approaches that you have to solve this problem? So, we've tried to summarize some of the different approaches that are available, and of course, in the columns, you will see some of those options that are available to you. If you pay attention to the rows, they kind of talk about, your drivers. Why would you choose this option as opposed to the other one? Plus also, the rows speak about the potential cost, because every option has an associated cost with it. And every option, there are certain drivers that will force you towards one option than the other. So if you really look at the columns, the options available to you, one is probably to, use the pre-built cubes, or maybe use some customization of pre-built cubes. For an example, if most of your data in your organization is in AX, and the need for you to integrate legacy data or external data is low, then you can probably aim to have a low complex solution by customizing or extending the pre-built solution. Now, of course, the benefit that you get is that you can leverage the pre-built tools that we've provided with the product. So it's easier for you to maintain a solution in AX because you have the power of modeling capabilities, and then we've created tools which will actually help you create those analytical components. So therefore, the cost is generally lower. Time to implement is pretty quick. If you're really good at using these tools, for an example, our developers, they take a couple of minutes to an hour. It might take you days, depending on the complexity, how familiar you are. And of course, the expertise needed, obviously, you would need to know the AX tools and how they operate. But beyond that, if you're an AX developer, then you don't need to know a whole lot about analytical tools and technologies. Now, if most of your data is in AX, and if you have external data sources that you need to bring in, another approach would be to bring that data into AX using either AIF or ETL directly into tables or something like that. Bring that data into AX, because again, if your rationale is that if AX is the system of record, then it makes sense to bring the other data into AX. So again, the benefit is you can use AX tools to report on that data, and you can even expose that data inside AX. Now, of course, on the other side, you might decide that, you know what, no, a lot of the data lives outside AX, and I would rather take AX data outside, and I would rather integrate them outside. In which case, you probably have a choice of, on the extreme, this side, you have the choice of a data warehouse, or you can even do a simpler integration by using SSAS-based integration. Of course, you would use SSAS-based integration if your integration needs are simpler. In other words, your data is in a nicely formatted way. You don't need to do a lot of matching and merging, that kind of things, to marry it up with AX data. Also, if your modifications, you can localize them into this SSAS solution. So, there's a simpler approach to integrate, but again, depends on how complex this integration needs are. But then, if none of those things satisfy, then probably, you may have to look for an ETL-based data warehouse solution. Of course, a data warehouse solution gives you the maximum flexibility, but of course, in terms of investments, it's a degree above the others as well. Yes, please. So the question is, if you went with the data warehouse-based approach, can you integrate the data from the data warehouse back into AX? I think the question is what you want to integrate. Do you want to integrate data, or do you want to integrate reports and views and things like that? Sure. So yes, you can do that. I mean, in that case, what you would probably do is, as the role center is based on SharePoint. So as long as you can incorporate those reports and some artifacts into the role center, that's probably an easier way to integrate. So you could absolutely do that. So the idea here is to share with you some of the approaches that you can think about when you get a requirement like that. And so what Simon has done is Simon has actually come up with a solution. And TJ, you want to share what Simon has come up with?
Well, sure. Well, Simon first identified the fact that people just weren't having success in figuring out where the outstanding balances are. I mean, people are using this customer aging report. It's got hundreds and hundreds of pages of numbers, and they're just skimming through the reports, and it's really difficult to track down exactly where their attention should be focused. And in his mind, you should focus on the customers with the largest outstanding balance for the longest amount of time. Makes sense. But that information, which seems intuitive to the end user, is just really difficult to glean from the data. When you have a bunch of numbers to cipher through, even though the objective is clear, the path to get there isn't always so clear. So we're going to show you some reports. I don't see them here. Do you have my reports?
So this is the solution that Simon has developed, and what we will do is first. It's in my thumb drive.
All right. Well, I'm not going to show them. I'll show them the new reports. I'll have to wait till my session to do that. So more incentive to come to my session, which I'll point. We'll give you a pointer to it later today, or at the end of the slide deck.
We have a technical malfunction. I've forgotten some of the slides.
It's okay.
Sorry. So part of the solution is actually building a new cube that Sarah needs to use. So what we're going to do today is to build a new cube for Sarah using AX tools available. So now, how do you actually build a cube? Well, I think the best way to approach that is to identify the requirements. I don't have to tell you that. But typically, I guess this is how you would go about identifying requirements for a cube. So for an example, you would maybe look at a report, the kind of report that Sarah wants. And if, this is a typical report that Sarah wants to share with Julia, and it basically shows sales by channel. Now, if you really look at it, that you have sales channels on this side. Sorry, I need to look at a different screen. On this side, and then you have months. So the idea is here's a total of sales by month, but from each channel. Now, of course, certain channels are doing, badder than others. And of course, when you show a report like this, what you're trying to, I guess, show is sales revenue by sales channel by month, right? So this is revenue. We show it by channel by month. Now, what happens when you show a report like this is that, hey, wholesale customers, there's a negative number. So we need to, that sounds interesting. So you probably want to see if it's a seasonality issue. Maybe there's a lot of returns. So what you typically do is try to slice it by time. Instead of looking at by month, maybe let's look at it by years or quarters to see if there's some seasonality. The other thing is you might want to look at the average sales value, right? So, when you show a report like this, when Sarah has a problem, a whole lot of other questions crop up. And these other questions can be, summed up like this. Revenue by channel by quarter, revenue by channels by region. You might want to bring in the sales region. Maybe it's something specific to a certain region. So this is a typical set of requirements that you would gather before building a cube. Now, the way to approach building a cube, I guess, is to, kind of sum it up like a pivot table. So the only thing I've done here is I had the same questions, but I've kind of shown it like a pivot table. So I have all my, things I need to report on, or the measures, in rows. And on my dimensions are the things that I want to slice it by, right? And they're in columns. So, that's kind of how you get a list of questions transformed into measures and slicers, right? And you could also think of filters. But then fundamentally, the idea here is you want to identify the measures and then the slicers or dimensions in a more formal way, right? Is everyone familiar with this? Can I see a quick raise of hands? Perfect. So, yeah, I shouldn't have taken so much time to explain this then. So, now, once you get to this point, how do you actually go and build a cube in AX? Let's see how we do that. So, let me go into the developer UI in AX. And, this is the UI that a developer will typically see. And what you probably know is that in the data dictionary, there is a node called perspectives. So perspectives is the place where you actually model cubes. Now, perspective is nothing new in Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. We had perspectives in AX4. We had perspectives in AX 2009. And in AX 2009, we introduced the idea of modeling OLAP, or cubes in perspectives. And basically, it's the evolution of perspectives, right? So we haven't, those concepts are still there. So what you need to do is, now you remember the measures that you needed, and then the slicers you needed. So what you basically have to do is, from AX tables and views, identify the tables or views that have those measures and drop them into perspectives, right? Because we need to assemble our data first. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I'm going to create a new perspective, and I'm going to call it perspective 1. And now usage, I'm going to say it's OLAP, because I'm going to model OLAP here. Now you probably remember in AX 2009, you could say OLAP or ad hoc reporting. Now, ad hoc reporting is no longer there in this usage because we no longer support the semantic model generation with the use of perspectives in AX 2012, right? So you create a new perspective. Now, the thing you'll notice now is you can actually drop a view into a perspective. So there's a rich collection of views already in AX. You can actually reuse those views and create cubes out of them. And if you probably know about Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012, views have this concept of computed columns. So the idea is when you create a view, you can actually create a computed column inside that view. So you can actually, most of the calculations, you can actually embed them inside views now, right? So what I'm going to do is remember those, the measures that I wanted. I wanted the sales amount. I wanted the number of unit sales. I wanted the number of customers. I'm going to bring those data into my perspective, and I'm going to create a cube, right? So now I need to know where that data is, of course. I know that there is a table called, there's a view called CustTrans Total Sales. It's a regular view. I'm going to drag and drop that in here. There is a table called CustTableCube, which basically has customer data denormalized in a nice little fashion so that it works really well in demos. But anyways, you can drag and drop it here, right? Now, you can also drag and drop tables. Now, we were interested in the payment terms that we offer to our customers, right? So there is a table called Cust Pay Mode Table. It's there somewhere. Cust Pay Mode. You know what? Is there? Oh. But that's okay. I know I fall into situations like this, so I kind of did it beforehand. So I dragged and dropped it. So I've dragged and dropped the tables. I've dragged and dropped the table and the views that I need. Now, once you drag and drop them, what you need to do next is, of course, if you expand these views, you will find that it's got a bunch of fields, right? Now, what you need to do is you need to identify what measures you're interested in and what slicers you're interested in. Remember back to our slide about measures and, slicers? So account number, so amount is something interesting because that's my sales amount. And I say that it's a measure, right? I select measure here. And how do I want it summed up? How do I want it aggregated? I'm going to say sum. There's a bunch of other things that I can do, right? I'm going to say sum because amounts need to be summed up, right? Now, here's what's interesting. Now, this is a multi-company database. So what happens is there are different companies, and some companies are based in Saudi Arabia, some companies are based in China. So the transactions of those companies are in those respective currencies, right? Now, when you try to aggregate them from a cube, you can't add up Chinese yuan and US dollars and pounds. You need to convert them, right? Now, in order to convert them, of course, you need to use the exchange rates that are in AX. But also, now, when you convert them, when you use the exchange rate to convert them, what date would you use? You can't use today's date because the transactions that happened about a month ago were already taken into your books using the exchange rate at that point in time. So for that, you can actually pick a date that you want to use to convert these amounts into the currency that you want. Okay? So the idea is you pick your measures, and so there are fields that you're not interested in. You just leave them as it is. And there are slicers, and you can say that they're attributes because you want to slice by them. And I have selected date as an attribute because I want to, trend it by year, month, and so on and so forth. So that's basically all I did.
So now let me understand.
Yes.
As an administrator, I would just need to launch the Cube Wizard.
Yes.
Deploy this perspective, and I'll have a cube from which I can report off of. From
Absolutely. Absolutely. So once you actually dropped your measures, once you identified what fields you want as measures and attributes, you're all ready to go.
Very nice.
So just so you know, there's a couple of other properties that are interesting. Like, for an example, if you're a BI geek, you may know things like
Sorry.
You are.
Admitted.
So you may know things like degenerate dimensions. You may know things like junk dimensions and stuff like that. So we've given you a bunch of attributes to force those. Also, we've actually given you the ability to put labels that are nicer than the labels that are coming from tables, right? We've done it so that you can create a cube that is really performant and really optimized and things like that, but you don't really have to. Maybe at least at the prototyping stage, you just don't need to. So we created the perspective. Now let's just go into Tools, BI Tools, Analysis Project Wizard. Let's say create a new cube. Let me call it My Customers. And let me say Next. Now, of course, we need to pick the perspectives where it came from. Now, I've defined my own perspective. In fact, I run this before the demo to make sure everything runs, so that's why it remembers what I did last time. But I've selected the My Customers perspective that I've created here. Now, what are these perspectives? They're the ones that correspond to the out-of-the-box cubes, right? Now, if you want to, you can actually include any of the dimensions that have been already modeled in the out-of-the-box dimensions, out-of-the-box perspectives. I'm not going to do that for now, right? So I'm going to hit Next. Now, I can include AX financial dimensions into this cube. So the idea here is if I had any of the financial dimensions in my data set, I can actually slice and dice them by any of the financial dimensions that I had defined. I'm going to include them in here. I didn't have any financial dimensions in the table, by the way, but I'm going to just include it here and I'll show you what happens. Now, the other thing is, of course, you want to slice it by date because you had a date field. But what's interesting here is, you want to slice it by a calendar, let's just say, that corresponds to a subsidiary that you have. So what we've done in this release is we actually have a UI with which actually you can define calendars. So for an example, there's a standard date calendar that ships with the product. But if you want to create additional calendars, like for an example, a calendar where your fiscal year starts in July as opposed to January, and maybe the first date of your week is Sunday, it's not Monday, and you want these hierarchies, you can basically build your calendar here, right? And you can build a new calendar and you can include it. So the idea is that all the dates that you've selected as attributes, you can actually slice them by any calendar that you define here, right? So I'm going to hit Next. Now, I can also pick the labels that I want to bring into the cube. Now, of course, let's just say I have a subsidiary in the Middle East, and then my manufacturing is in China, and of course, we have our corporate offices in the US, so I'm going to select these three languages. Now, remember we talked about the currency conversion? Now, I want to include currency conversion in the project that gets generated. So the idea is the framework will add the currency conversion logic that is necessary to do the translation from one currency to the next. And I'm done. So now the wizard goes on, looks at the relationships in AX, because I just brought in views and tables. I never specified that this relates to that and so on and so forth. The wizard tries to identify all the relationships in there. And then the wizard also tries to identify all the labels so that it names them appropriately. And then the wizard is generating a cube project. Generating a project, it's an analysis services server project which can be deployed into a server, and I'll have my cubes. So TJ, I think we can take one or two questions at this point. Yes, sir.
So where does it get its currency exchange?
So the question is, where does it get its exchange rates? Good question. So in AX, AX maintains an exchange rate table. You can enter exchange rates. You can give a from date and a to date. And for every currency pair, you can actually give an exchange rate. There's also this concept of exchange rate type in AX 2012. So that's where we get the exchange rate data from.
This is not based on a single AX company.
Right. So it's not based off of a single AX company, but then the idea is that there's multiple, you can have 10 companies in AX. But there's a central exchange rate table where exchange rates for all these companies are maintained. So the idea is, in this company's reporting currency could be pounds. This company's reporting in currency could be yuan. So in AX, if you go open up AX client against this company, everything is shown in yuan.
So the short answer, currency exchange rates are not company specific.
No,
They're just
they're global.
exactly.
Yeah, it's a global table.
We've only got 1 minute left. I want to make sure, I took this opportunity as a teaser to talk more about reporting. I'd like for you to come to my session as well. Got a chance to show you some of the user experience enhancements for the reporting framework, but there's a lot more. There's 3 major buckets of usage of reports. There's administrators, there's the developers, and there's the end users. Talking about end users, I'll delve a little bit into administration of reports, but development aspect of the reporting framework is where I'm going to focus on in the next session. I am a developer by trade. I'm a program manager now, but I was a developer 12 years, so they're near and dear to my heart. And that experience is important to understand. It's very different from the traditional MorphX development tasks. So if you could bring up the slide that shows...
Half an hour.
We have another half an hour? Oh, sure. No, we have, this ends at 8. We're done at 8. We just got the countdown.
9:30.
Do we have till 9:30 or?
We have 9:30. Yes.
Okay.
Sorry. We've generated a project, and then we're going to save it to the AOT. Why would you not save it to the AOT? Yeah, you might want to save it to the disk. Some folks may want to maintain their project on disk, but sure, maybe you wouldn't, but it's possible. And then, of course, you can deploy and process the project, but I'm not going to do that. You get the idea. But I've deployed this project earlier, before the demo, and I've processed these cubes as well. So let's just quickly see what got generated, right? So let's launch Excel. And let's see what so it deployed into a database called My Customers, and I get to create a data connection to go to My Customers, and here's basically what got created. So we wanted amount. So the system created a measure called amount. And we also wanted the number of customers. So the system created this number of customers. This is all based on the metadata that I've defined. And let me just skip through some of the dimensions, get to the interesting ones. System created customer information dimension because we wanted customer details to get in. So for an example, you can look at city, you can look at customer name. Customer name is more interesting than city. And also, the system brought in date. And now, in this example that I've deployed, I only have the date calendar, but you can see that these are some of the richer hierarchies that are available to you. So for an example, I can do this. And let me actually take the customer name away. And it creates a rich hierarchy with which you can browse the data. And the other thing is it brought in the methods of payment. This was the payment mode the payment mode details that we wanted. Now, some of the other interesting things that you got for free is this concept of analysis currency. So the idea is that actually you can just get rid of this. Let me just get rid of this as well. So if you use the analysis currency dimension, it actually converts the amounts into any currency that you want using the exchange rates, right? And then if you use, and then you of course have the company currency, so that this is a multi-company database, so you can select the companies that you want. You can either select all the companies or you can select just the company that you're interested in, right? So what I wanted to show you is the richness of the cube that gets created. And now if you go back to the AOT, remember we saved our project into the AOT. You will see that the project is saved in the AOT. And what you can actually do is you can right-click and say Edit, and it will launch that project in Visual Studio, in BI Development Studio. So it's launching here. Let me bring it back. So what got generated is a first-class citizen of the Microsoft BI framework. It's a Visual Studio project, and you can actually go and extend it using BI Dev Studio if you wanted to. Show of hands, how many people are familiar with the BI Development Studio? Okay, quite a few, quite a few. Any questions here? Yes?
Where is the processing of the cubes?
So processing of the cubes will have to be managed through SSAS. We don't control that through AX. Yes, sir.
What happens when you get to the step where it fills in relationships and some of them still aren't there?
Right, that's a good question. So now, as you can see, the framework tries to infer relationships between the views and tables that you have modeled using relationships that are in AX. So there are situations where the framework cannot infer relationships between certain tables. So the question is, what happens if there aren't any relationships that you can infer? So, there's two kinds of relationships that are inferred. One is, of course, the table relationships that are defined in the AOT. And then when it comes to views and views, we try to infer the relationship based on the tables that create that view. Now, in case we can't come up with a relationship, we give a warning at the generation time. You didn't see it today, of course, saying that these measure groups and these dimensions cannot be related. It's just a warning. It gets added to the log. So what you can do is you can actually go in and add them on your own in BI Development Studio. Now whatever changes you make in BI Development Studio, you can save it back into the AOT. And if you try to update the project, those relationships won't go away. They will be there. We'll preserve them for you. Okay, so what I really wanted to show was the richness of the solution that gets generated and how easy it is to create these cubes. So looks like we have technical issues. We won't be able to show the building of the report. Are we planning to show something like that, TJ, in the...
Yeah, I'll show that in my follow-up session. I won't show that today.
Yeah.
He's going to show that on the next slide. Actually, we've got the details coming up.
Yeah. So basically what we... in summary, what we showed you today is the comprehensive BI solution that ships with Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012. We wanted to share with you how easy it is to implement and configure the solution with the use of the Analysis Services Project Wizard. Most of the customizations are easy to achieve, and of course, if the customization requirement extends beyond what we have provided for in the wizard, you obviously have the ability to extend using BI Dev Studio, and and of course leverage the many tools that are out there. And the BI content that you create can be incorporated easily back into the AX role centers and the AX client. So TJ, we have a couple of other sessions coming up.
Yes, so the sessions I was referring to were IDX AX24 R1, That's this afternoon from 5 to 6. I believe it's in room 304A.
For it.
And then tomorrow evening we have a repeat of that session. It's at 4:30 through 5:30 p.m. Just to close out in style. And that's where we're getting to the nitty-gritty ins and outs of reporting framework. Some of the differences between the MorphX experience and the SSRS development experience. And it's just your opportunity to get some face time with the R&D team and get some of your questions answered. We've got a slew of resources out there on the web, and we continue to expand those resources so that we answer the questions that you guys have. We really appreciate feedback from customers, so I really hope you can join me. It's going to be a fun session.
Looks like we have about 10 minutes for additional questions, if you have any. Yes, sir. Report Builder gone. So the question is the Report Builder integration no longer available? The answer is no, it is available. What we found out, I mean, I'll give you the longer story. What we found out was that the ad hoc reporting models that we created through AX 2009 and in AX4, only about 2% of customers actually used it. When I say used it, they're the ones who tried it once or twice. So it was a feature that no one really used. And the other problem was, when we really looked at how they used it, we realized that they were actually creating aggregate reports that pulled in all the invoices and sliced them by all the customers and so on. So they really didn't perform. Because, regardless of what you do, if you're trying to pull, a couple of million records, it's going to be slow. So our recommendation now is actually to use cubes with Report Builder. Think of cubes as aggregate data. And also it's much friendlier, because one of the other complaints that we got with reporting models is that those models are super complex and that the users get confused and they get lost when they started using it. So our recommendation now is, use the pre-built cubes with Report Builder. It's a lot friendlier. It'll perform super fast, and our feedback so far is that users love it. Yes, sir.
On the CEO role center slide, there was a goal for net income. Is that stored in the budget, or is that stored in the KPI, or where's that coming from?
Right, so the question is, there was a KPI that we showed in the CEO role center, net income. There's a goal in that net income. Where is that goal stored? The KPI definitions that you will see are actually defined in the cube project that is generated. So these KPI definitions, including the goal value, how is the actual calculated, how is the trend calculated, that's all stored in the project that gets generated. There's goodness and badness. Goodness, of course, is that any tool that can consume these cubes are aware of these KPIs. For an example, you can pull these KPI definitions into Excel, Performance Point, and a few others that are coming down the line. But the downside is that to maintain those goals, you unfortunately have to go into BI Dev Studio and maintain them. So to change those goals, you would need a developer. It's not hard to do, but then you would need a developer to go and open it up. So that's the upside and the downside. I'm sorry, sir. What's the question again? Oh, so the question is there a plan to extend the KPI goal definition to end users? Well, what I can say is that it's going to become easier in the future. In terms of, are we going to create a UI where end users can enter, goals? We're not. The reason why we are not doing that is there's going to be other tools that are going to be available. For an example, if you, if you think that you need a better option, maybe Performance Point might be an option. There's a dashboard designer which is catered towards power users. You can do it, and the good thing about it is now when you implement SharePoint Enterprise version, you of course get the performance component, Performance Point Dashboard Designer for free. I don't know if you've taken a look at SQL Server Power Pivot for Excel. Now in Power Pivot, actually you can define KPIs as well. So that's another option. So there are many options available. So from a Dynamics AX perspective, I don't think so that we will define our own UI. One last question. Yes, sir.
Interested in the possibility of having a methodology that allows my legacy resources that understand analysis services to develop their paradigm and then import or integrate that to AX versus going in through AX, which is a whole new paradigm for them. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, so let me ask a question before answering it. Now, your motivation to keep it inside analysis services, is it because they consume legacy data, or is it because you don't want to go through the AX tools?
Looking for a softer way to get them transitioned from the legacy world into the new world.
I see. Yeah. So the question is, maybe you have some pre-built content in analysis services that were built outside of, let's say, what we have shown today. The question is, how would you transition over a period of time? Because you can't get rid of them straight away because your senior managers are still, relying on them, I guess, right? Well, there's a couple of approaches. Now, maybe the simplest approach to begin with would be to expose those analytic content in the role centers. Now, you can do so with third-party tools if they have web parts. Like, for an example, Excel has web parts. Performance Point would be able to consume them. There would be other ISV tools as well. Now, you can straight away expose them inside a role center, so they'll still get the familiar look and feel. And over a period of time, maybe you can refactor them into more like AX-friendly cubes with the analysis currency, company dimensions, and so on and so forth. Once you start building that, some of the AX web parts themselves will start understanding those cubes. And of course, maybe that's after a certain point, maybe you would refactor them using the AX tools. That's a transition approach that we've seen very commonly among customers. One last question. One last question, folks. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.